Zok Tehillah Gemara. We're starting on Daf Kuf Yudalad Amud 4 lines from the top. Tonight is Motzoi, Shabbos, Cholamoid, Sukkos, and we're going to learn now the 3 blots from Thursday, from Erev Shabbos, and from Shabbos. Zok Tehillah Gemara. Itman. We have a machlokes. Kinyan. Ad emasai chayzer. Until when can someone be chayzer after having had made a kinyan? It's almost like a cooling off clause. Rabba Omar calls man sheyotru. As long as they're still sitting there in that maimed, the parties can be chayzer. Rabbi Yosef Omer calls man she'oiskin ba'isa inyan. Even if they're still sitting on that maimed, but if they've already changed the subject and they're now discussing something else, the kinyan is irrevocable and neither party can be chayzer. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Zok Rabbi Yosef, Kavasi di mistabra. It's a more mistabra to say that once they finish this topic, it becomes irrevocable. The Amar Rabbi Huda, because Rabbi Huda said, and this is the same Rabbi Huda that we learned on the last daf. 3 people went to visit a chayil. Rotzu koisvin. And the chayil now wants to be mizake amatana to specific people to divert his Yerusha. So there's 3 people there. So Ratzu Koisvin, if they want, they can take on a role of Adam, or Ratzu Oisim Din, they can actually take on a role of as a Bezdin and Paskin that this kinyan is permanent, and in fact, the recipient will get that chayla. The problem is, if they're still there in the building, if they're still there in the Maimid, if they're still there visiting with the chayla, if you're going to hold as long as they're still there, the Bailim, the Makna could still back out. Maybe he was chayzer. And the Rashbam tells us, is v'amai hakibin the yochalachsabay. So we're not chayzer that he was chayzer, he can still be chayzer. Because until the Dayanim leave, this person can still be chayzer. So how could they pass on something when they know that this person can change his mind? V'yavat ladin, he'll change his mind even after they made the kinyan, after they paskin, because they're still there. Therefore, lo yavadin. So it must be that as soon as they finish discussing this topic, it becomes irrevocable. Omer Abashi, Amrisa l'shmaitza kamed Rav Kahana. I shared this with Rav Kahana that there's a kasha on Rabbah, and it seems to be a right Rabbi Yosef. And Rav Kahana said, "Ulu Rabbi Yosef minicha." You think according to Rabbi Yosef, it's any better? Maybe the Eiter he'll be chayzer before the end of the conversation. Elamai islach lemeimar. What are you going to argue? Until they change the subject, they can't record their psak because, in fact, it's possible that the giver will back out. So once you're saying that we're discussing that the Bezdin will only sign and proclaim the psak after they change the subject according to Rabbi Yosef, well then, hachinami the kamu v'hadar yasibu. Even according to Rabbah, that it's revocable until they finish the maimed, let them get up from the maimed. Then they could write the psak because now it's irrevocable. And then they could sit down again to continue their visit. So therefore, you don't have a raya either way. Zok to Gemara Paskins, Rabbi Yosef, the Soda in Yinumechza. There's 3 cases in where we paskin like Rabbi Yosef against Rabbah. By Soda, which we learned at the beginning of our Masechta, in a case where there are some brothers that are splitting up the Yerusha of their father, they're splitting up a piece of property. And one of the brothers happens to own a piece of property adjacent to this property. So the brother could say, Al Tzmida Sedoim, I want the chelik of my father's property that's adjacent to the property that I already have. Rabbi Yosef said you cannot say that. You know what? Because the other brothers could say, this is not Midas Sedoim. That specific property that's adjacent to your property is a phenomenally special, wonderful property. And it's worth a lot of money to us. So therefore, why should we give up the advantage of this premium property just because you're a bar mitzvah? So that's where we pass on like Rabbi Yosef. By Indian, we pass on like Rabbi Yosef, which is our case over here, that once it switches from Indian to Indian, the Kenyan is irrevocable. And Umerza is a case where Rabbi Yosef said that if someone says to his wife, I'm going to give you my Yerusha and my boys, we don't say that you split it evenly according to how many people there are. So let's say there's 5 boys. You don't say you split it into 6 halakim, 5 for the boys and 1 for the wife. Rather, 50% goes to the wife and 50% will be split evenly amongst the boys. Our Mishnah tells us that an Isha will be moirish to her son, but she will not yarshin from her son. And the Mishnah actually lists off 2 sets of cases. First, the Mishnah focuses on the halacha where a son yarshins from his mother. And then the Mishnah goes to a whole different set of cases where the mother doesn't yarshin from the son. As we see in the Mishnah, Isha Simoy is not manchilim. And then the Mishnah goes through a separate set of cases, Isha Spaneh is manchilim. Why would the Tanya need to repeat a Isha Spaneh from the fact that we already said a Isha Simoy yarshins, but it's not manchil? That already has said what the second set of cases have mentioned. So why was it necessary for the Mishnah to repeat this very same halach? Zog Gemara, Hatani L'Reisha, Ha'isha Simai Va'isha Zishtai. Zog Gemara, Ha Kamash Malon. You know what you learned from here, a big chiddush? Let's look into the Bach. Omer Rab Sheshes is saying this. Ha Kamash Malon, the Isha Espina, Dumya the Isha Esbayim. The same way a child yarshins from her mother, the same way a father yarshins, I apologize again, the same way a husband yarshins from his wife with certain limitations and certain restrictions, so too, when a son yarshins from a mother, there will be the same limitations and the same restrictions. Ma ishos bayo. Just like when a man yarshins from his wife, ein habal yoresh es ishtay bekem. What happens if a man is married to a woman and she has a father and the father has a huge piece of property? And normally, if the father would die, if his father-in-law would die, his wife would yarshin it, this big piece of property. And then if his wife would die, he would yarshin it from his wife. But what happens, Rahman al-Islam, if his wife died before the father? So there was no property in the wife's possession at the time of her death. And then later on, the father-in-law dies. The Baal is not Yorish, that property. The Baal is not Yorish, his wife, Bekever. So we don't say that the wife, when she's in her kever, she yarshins is from her father and then passes it on to her husband. Rather, we say that that property that belonged to the father-in-law will go to his other yarshim from his family. So too, Isha Espinal. So too, when a son is yarshining from a mother, Ein Abayin Aben Yorish is Imay Bekever. What would happen, Rahman al-Islam, if a son died before the mother, and then the mother dies? So normally, you would say that even though the son's not alive, he yarshins it. Zok to Gemara, and that's not how it works when the son yarshins his mother. If the son yarshins his mother, and his mother has already died, and then the son died first, and then the mother died. You don't say that you look at it as if the son yarshins it. And if the son has no children and no other yarshim, who will yarshin this son? His brothers will yarshin it. His brothers with whom he shares a father, but not this mother. So we don't say that even though the son's not alive, he will yarshin from his mother and then divert the Yerusha from his mother over to his father's family, to his brothers who he shares a father with. You don't say that. Rather, this property will remain by other yarshim of the mother. Amr Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Shimon. And let's look at the Bach, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Shimon. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. The Var Torah, Ha'av Yorish Espinoi, a father yarshins his son, and the Isha Yoresh Espinoi. So Rabbi Yochanan is quoting from Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Shimon, not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that a woman does not yarshin her son. But Rabbi Yochanan is quoting from someone who would argue on the Mishnah, who holds that a woman does yarshin her son. Shinamar, it says matois. Now, if you remember, the pasuk said when it was talking about the benois tzlafchad, v'chol bas yoreshes nachlo mimatois b'nei Yisrael. And from this pasuk, the Gemara brought a raya that a daughter can yarshin mimatois, sai from her father and sai from her mother. So we learn from there that a girl yarshins from her father and sai from her mother, and we also learned that just like when a girl yarshins from her father, she is only in the second position, and if she has brothers, she will not yarshin from her father. So too, when she yarshins from her mother, that's only if there are no brothers, but if there are brothers, she will not yarshin from her mother. So from this same comparison between the Yerusha of a man and the Yerusha of a woman, the Gemara wants to say as well, you learn something else. You learn from here that just like a father yarshins his son, so too a mother will yarshin her son. Shenemar matois makesh mato eim lo mateo. Ma mateo av, just like the father av yorish espin, av mateo eim isha yoreshes espin. Frek the Gemara Akasha, turning on to Daf Kuf Tes Vov Amiram. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon. Frek the Bechna Gavaltik Akasha. Our Mishnah disagrees with you. Our Mishnah says, Ho isha espina, Ho isha espaila, V'achea eim, man chilim v'noy noichim. So this is a bombadik Akasha. How could Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon argue on the Mishnah? Amalei, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon could answer, Mishnah Seinu Eina Yadei Mishana. I don't know who quoted this Mishnah. And the Rashbam says, the Eino Yikr. I think that we don't paskin like the Mishnah. We paskin like other Tanoim who argue on the Mishnah. And we're going to soon see that there's a stira when they obey in our Mishnah, so there's good reason to argue that maybe our Mishnah is not accurate. Frag the Gemara, why didn't Rabbi Bar Shimon say, not Tam, I don't hold to the Mishnah, why didn't he identify the Tana that he does agree with? V'lei malei Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzafi. Why did we say that let's say that the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav. If you remember, Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav said that when a child yarshins from his mother, the son and the daughter are equal. So even though when children are yarshining from a father, the son comes first, but when they yarshin from the mother, the son and the daughter are equal. Why? Because Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav does not learn that hekesh of mimatois. So v'lei malei Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav. What do you mean? Any yodea Mishnah saying to Mishana? I don't know who said it. It's perfectly consistent with the Tana Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav. The loy darish matos. He does not darish matos. So therefore, the same way a bas and a ben are equal when it comes to yarshining a mother's nachla, so too a mother will not yarshin her son because we don't have matos to compare it to her husband. You cannot possibly say that our Mishnah does not darshan matos, and therefore holds like Rabbi Zchaya ben Akatzav, because our Mishnah says something that shows quite clearly that our Mishnah does darshan matos. The Mishnah says something else. Uvenei achos, a son will yarshin his mother's sister. He will yarshin his aunt through his mother. Vitana. And we have a brisa to clarify our Mishnah. B'nei achos v'loy b'noi achos. Only boys will yarshin their mother's sister, their aunt, but daughters will not yarshin their mother's sisters. The Gemara wanted to know, Lagabi, what halacha is the brisa telling us that this doesn't apply to b'noi achos, that daughters don't yarshin their aunts? Yomer Absheshes lekadim. Avadid daughters yarshin aunts if there's no sons. It just means to tell you that the sons are in the first position. So therefore, if the sons are there, the daughters won't yarshin at all. Now let's think for a second. How is the son yarshining his mother's sister? Through his mother. And we're saying that the son takes precedence to the daughter, which means the daughter does not yarshin equally with the son from her mother. Clearly, that would not work with Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, because Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav said that they do yarshin equally. So clearly our Mishnah cannot be going like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. And fakir, our Mishnah must learn matos. And it says that just like when you're yarshining from your father, the son comes first, so too when you're yarshing from the mother, the son comes first. Now that you're making that hekesh of matos, so by the same token, you should say that just like a father yarshins a son, a mother should yarshin a son, and our Mishnah doesn't say that. So it's a steer in our Mishnah. V'sol kedaitach mestizer Rabbi Zechariah ben Katzafi ha'amar. Rabbi Zechariah ben Katzav said, "Echad ben ve'echad haba shaven b'nichsayayin." He holds that the son and the daughter are equally going to yarshin their mother's nechosim, meaning the son doesn't get precedence. Our Tana clearly doesn't hold like that. So, for the Gemara, we have a steer in our Mishnah in Eubei. The Tana didon mimanavshech. Idarish matos. If our Tana darshins matos, and that's why our Tana says that a son yarshins a mother before the daughter, well, then Isha Nami Tirish Espana. That same matter should tell you that just like a father yarshins a son, so to a mother yarshins a son. And Eloi Darish Matos. And if our Tana is not darshing matos, well, then Ben the Koidim Levas Benichse Eminole. How does our Tana know that a son yarshins in the first position from his mother in front of his sister? And it's because of this stira that the Gemara said earlier that Rabbi Shimon said Mishnah Seinu Einidei Mishama, because it's a stira minei obey. One part of the Mishnah is mashma we're darshaning matos, and the other part of the Mishnah is mashma we're not darshaning matos. Zok the Gemara, we can for our Mishnah. Lo olam darish matos. Avada our Tana darshans matos to compare the av to the aim, and therefore the same way the son yarshins before his sister from their father, so too the son will yarshin before his sister from their mother. Oy bazoi, why don't we say the same way a father yarshins a son, so too a mother should yarshin her son? Zok the Mishnah, Zok the Gemara, because there's a separate limud to tell us that the mother will not yarshin her son. The shiny hacha, the Omar Kra, the Cholbas Yoreshes na. A daughter could yarshin mimatos from her mother and from her father, but she could only yarshin from her mother and her father. It's only one way. It comes to her from her mother and from her father. But moireshes she cannot do. Yoreshes vayna moireshes, but she will not be moirish to her mother, only to her father. So we learn it from yoreshes. She could be yoreshes mimatos. She could yarshin from both her father and her mother, but she will not be moirish to both her father and her mother. Rather, she will only be moirish to her father. Beautiful. Zok the Heilige Mishnah Vayt. Say the Nachlis Kam. This is the order of precedence when it comes to Yerusha. Now, right away we know the son is first, and then the pasuk says, "Ish ki yamasu ven einloi." If there is no son, va'avartem is nachalosoi labita. The daughter is in the next position. Ben kodim labas. Not only is the son, does the son take precedence over his sister? However, even if the son is not alive, his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren at Soif Kol HaDoros also are in the first position rather than it going to the Nifter's daughter herself. So it will go to the progeny of a son, no matter how many generations later it is, but it will not go to a daughter. And therefore, Kol Yoytze Yerechai Shol Ben Koid Min Labas. All of the progeny of the son come before the bas because they're in the mukam of the ben. Now, what if there is no son at all? Then comes a bas. The bas is kodemes la'achim. The bas, the daughter yarshins a nifter before the siblings will yarshin a nifter, and therefore yoytze yerecha shel bas kodim la'achim. No matter how many generations down it is from this daughter, they are all the mukam, their mother, their grandmother, who yarshins her father, rather than the father's Yerusha going to his siblings. And achin koidim la'achia. The siblings of the nifter take precedence to the uncles of the nifter. Yoytze yerechen shel achin, the children of any siblings at Tzoif Kol HaDoros, koidmin la'achia. So even if the nifter has no more surviving siblings, but they have children, and even if the nifter has a surviving uncle, the children of his siblings will get it before the surviving uncle. Zakla, this is the rule. Kol hakoidim b'nachla. If someone takes precedence in nachla, for instance, a son taking precedence to a daughter, yoytze yerecha koidim. All of his progeny, all of his einaklach stand in his place, and they will also be in front of a daughter. But there's one exception. A father will always be before his children. So if there is no bas, the Mishnah says bas kodemis la'ach. The bas gets before the siblings that are nifter. But there's an exception to that. The siblings that are nifter don't automatically get if there's no bas, because the father of the nifter will come before the siblings that are nifter. Why? Because the siblings that are nifter are the yoytze yerechoi of the father, and the father will always come before his own children. Therefore, using names that we're familiar with, if Reuven dies and he has no children, it can either go to his siblings, the Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, or it can go to Yaakov, his father. Zok the Mishnah, it will go to Yaakov first. First it goes to Yaakov before it goes to any of Yaakov's children. Gewalt, Toner Rabbanan, we don't have Braisa. Ben, a Ben Yarshins. Ainli Ben, what about Ben Ben? What about a grandchild? Or Basa Ben, even a grandchild who's a female, she's the daughter of the son of the Nifter. Or Ben Basa Ben, or it's the grandchild of the Yoirish of the son had a daughter, and the daughter had a son. Minayin, how do you know that they all take position before the daughter of the Nifter? It says, Ben ein loy, only then the havartim nachlos levitai. So ein loy means look closely. Even if the son is not surviving, but he has children or eineklich or eineklich, they all come before the bas. If there's no son or any of his children remaining, or grandchildren, or any progeny remaining, only then the havartim is nachlos levitai. Gewalt bas. Now it says a baskets, right? The havartim is nachlos levitai. But then the Mishnah says, "V'im ein bas." The lashon pasuk is, "V'im ein loy bas." Then you give it le'echav to the siblings. So bas ainly ella bas. If there's an actual daughter, what if there is no surviving daughter? Rather, there's a bas habas or a ben habas or a bas ben habas. What if there are later generations? The daughter didn't survive, but there's progeny of the daughter alive. How do you know that's also before anybody else? Don't just look if there's a surviving daughter. Any yichus there afterwards, any children afterwards are also included in the category of bas, and they'll get before the next level, which is the parent of the nifter and then the siblings of the nifter. Zok Helika Gemara Viter turning on to Kufta Sva of Amud Beis. Haketza. So how does this work? Nakla mimashmeshes voileches ad Reuven. When you're looking for a yoresh, you can go up and up and up, generation by generation. Because let's work this out. Someone dies, goes to his son. If there's no sons or any eniklich from the son's side, it goes to his daughter. If there's no daughter or any eniklich from the daughter's side, then it goes to the nifter's father. If there's no father, then it goes to the nifter's brothers. What if there's no brothers and there's no father? So then it goes up another generation to the grandfather. And again, the same cycle. If there's no one there, you got to go up again. And you keep on going up until you get to the original shevet that this person stems from. Frank the Gemara, why stop at Reuven? What if there's no one left from his shevet? Maybe you go up to Yaakov and then you could spread to other shvat. V'lema ad Yaakov. Amar Abaye, no, Gemiri, we learned the Lekala shift. There are psukim that teach us that there will always be a remnant of each of the 12 shvat. So therefore, you never have to go back to Yaakov and then possibly find a different shevet for this Yerusha to go to. There will always be a remnant of every single shevet. So therefore, the highest up you would have to go to is the actual shevet, and there will be some enical somewhere there that will be able to yash.
But Yosy, don't you then go over to an uncle? In other words, when you go back to Yaakov, that means you're going to end up going to Esau.
Well, that's if you're going to assume Yaakov died. But if Yaakov didn't die, then you can go to one of Yaakov's children.
Right. Okay. And we know Yaakov didn't die. Yaakov vinu loy meis. So
I think he did die.
Okay.
So what's interesting is the Gemara talks about that you have a Yerusha and you're looking and searching to find somebody who could be Irish. In reality, it's the opposite. The Yerusha are lining up, looking for who gets the Yerusha.
Right.
It sounds like from the Gemara that everyone's bayreach from the Kesef. We have to find somebody who will be able to be willing to hold it. So you're asking me if there are no Shvatim, then it would end up going to Esav. That's true. But if there are Shvatim, we never have to worry.
Well, you never went up to Yaakov, right? So you
never even have to go to Yaakov, and therefore it wouldn't have to go to a different Shevet. It'll always stay in that shape.
I mean, we're talking about, obviously there's land. Metaltalin is a whole different story.
Why?
Right?
Metaltalin also Yerush.
I know, but that doesn't have to necessarily stay within the Shevet.
Sure it does.
Metaltalin also do?
It says V'leishis of Nachla. Now the Menach is probably the land of Eretz Yisrael, but now that those are the rules of Yerusha, I believe it stays that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Amar Avhuna Amarav. Kala Omer, whoever would claim falsely and paskin a perversion that Tiresh Bas in Bas Habein. So Reuven had two children. He had a boy and a girl. Now, what happened was normally the boy would yarsh, but the boy died and he has a daughter. So we know the halacha is his daughter yarshens everything, and Reuven's daughter gets nothing. But if you will wrongly paskin that a daughter, when there's a son alive, the daughter gets nothing. But if the son's not alive and he only has a daughter, so there's a granddaughter of the nifter alive and a daughter of the nifter alive, they both get. If someone would say that, I feel nasi should be Yisrael, even if he was a nasi, ain't shoymin, you would not listen to him. She'einon ella ma'aset tzedaikim. This is a false psak based on the false interpretation of the tzedaikim. The Tanya we learned to Bryce. Barbov Esrim V'Tevis. On the 24th day of Tevis, there was a Yom Tiv. This is in Megillas Tainus. This was a Yom Tiv. Why was there a Yom Tiv? Because Tavna Ledinina, we returned back to the proper din. In other words, we finally proved to the Tzedaikim that they're false and that this is the halacha. So that became a Yom Tiv because we've established the halacha al pi Torah. So you Tzedaikim oimrin Tire Shabbos im Bas Haben. The Tzedaikim claim that a daughter would yarshin along with an enikol, a girl. And normally people wouldn't want to engage with these Tzedaikim, but Nitpal Lahen Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai decided to engage them and prove them wrong. Amar Lehem, he told him, Shoitim, fools what you are. Minayin zelochem. Where in the world did you get such a crazy, wrongful psak? Adam Sheikh Zirai. Even the Tzedaikim, they were afraid, they didn't want to challenge Rabbi Yochanan. There was some Zakin Mamre who thought he would be a Knacker. He really lost his nun a long time ago. So he stood up to oppose Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. If you remember a couple of blot ago, we had that Pinchas was mi benois Putiel, and one of the Putiels was referring to Yosef. He challenged and beat up and resisted his Yitzhara. So this Zakan Echad challenged and resisted Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But he said there's a perfectly logical argument why the daughter should yarshin with an enikol if the only surviving enikol is a female. Because as follows, Uma bas benoi, madich an enikol, the daughter of the son of the nifter, who doesn't have a direct connection to the nifter, rather habo mikoyach benoi, she is only coming mikoyach her father, who is the son of the nifter, tirashenu, she will still yarshin. Bitoy habo mikoychai, the nifter's own daughter, who has a direct connection to the nifter. Loy kol shekain, surely she should also yarshin together with her niece. Kara alavas hamikra said. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai quoted the following pasuk to show these tzedaikim what fools they were. And the pasuk says as follows: Eila b'nei seir hachayri. These are the b'nei seir hachayri. Yosh ve'aretz was the reshbam fatayches as people who yarshin the land of Seir. And who were these children? Loiton, Shovel, Tzivain, and Anna. It sounds like they were four siblings. Loiton, Shovel, Tzivain, and Anna. But the problem is, there's another pasuk that says, Uksuv Ela b'nei Tzivain v'ayav Anna. meaning Anna was Tzivon's child. How could Anna have been Tzivon's child if Anna was Tzivon's sibling? Elamalamed, it shows that this was a messed up family. Shabbat Tzivon al Imai. Tzivon had relations with his mother, the Hailed Anna, and gave birth to Anna, which means Anna was not only his son, but Anna was also his sibling because they shared a mother. And nevertheless, Anna, who was only an anacle of Seir, was yarshining along with his uncles, because it says Yosy are the yarshind loiton v'shoivel v'tzivon v'Anna. So obviously, it's saying that Anna was in Tzivon's shoes to yarshin from the grandfather Seir, together with his uncles Loiton and Shoivel. So you see, Ben Aben is just like a Ben. So if Ben Aben is just like a Ben, so then Bas Ben is just like a Ben. And therefore, you, lowlife, Tzedokim, you don't know what you're talking about. Frank Gemara, what's the raya? V'dil matrei Anahab. Maybe Tzivon had a sibling by the name of Anna, and maybe he also had a child by the name of Anna. Who said there was such a perverted story? Omar Rabba, Zokt Rabba, Amina Milso de Amar Shvar Malka. I'm going to say something that Shvar Malka didn't say. Shvar Malka, everybody paskin like him. His psak was always right. Umani Shmuel. I think the Bach changes this to. Let's see if I can find the Bach. Umanu. Shmuel. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's Shmuel. And then Ika the Amri Amar Papa Amina Milso de Amar Shvar Malka Umanu Rabbo. I think they changed the Rav. Amar the pasuk says, "Who Anna?" The next pasuk says, "Who Anna asher motza sayim b'midbar." So we dash who Anna. It's the same Anna. Who Anna the Mikar? It's the same Anna as listed in the first pasuk. It was the same person. So clearly, this child was a mamzer. He was the product of the son Sivon who had relations with his mom. Gewaltig. Zogt the Tzedoki, this Zokin some Mamri Tzedoki, back to Bichem and Zakai. Amar le Rebbe bekach ata poitreni. That's how you're going to knock me off. I know that Ben Haben is just like the father. I'm talking about Bas Haben. Bas Haben should not be so much like the father, and therefore, if there's a Bas Haben, the Bas and the Nifter should yarshin equally with them. Amar Lois Rebbe Yechem and Zakai told him weiter, Shaita. Yes, my taina might not be such a good taina. My taina not be such a good, but you think I'm going to tell you the real tainas? You're a lowlife. I wouldn't even share with you the real emes of Torah. I'm just diverting you. You think we're going to treat the Torah, which we need to have great reverence for, the kedusha of the Torah, we're going to share with you your nonsense kal v'chaimers and discuss that? And I'm going to even show you that your whole kal v'chaimer is nonsense of a nonsense. What are you trying to say? That the daughter is closer to her father, the deceased, than her niece. That's not true. I'll show you that the niece is closer than the daughter. How do I see that? Mal bas benoi shekin yafa koicha b'makam achad. Bas benoi gets a chelik, an equal chelik, even if there's other brothers there, even if there's other surviving brothers. This einikel will get an equal share. The daughter will get nothing amongst the other brothers. So clearly, an anical, a daughter of a son, has a greater connection to get to Yerusha than the daughter herself. Vinatzku, and this was a fatal blow to the taina of the Tzedokim, and they had to concede. And that was a big yomtiv because they finally knocked off this horrible falshe piskei halach of the Tzedokim. Yomtiv. So I want to stop her for one moment because Tosfos has an awesome thing. The way I learned this Gemara, the Tzedoki succeeded in diffusing the raya from the pasuk of Anna because he said that the son of a son is not the daughter of a son, and we're talking about the daughter of a son. But the way Tosfos learned is beautiful. He learns who said Anna was a male. Maybe Anna was a female. The Anna Isha Haisa. Anna was a daughter, and Anna Yarshin from Seir, the Makay, your father Tzivon. So the pasuk is mamish speaking about the daughter of a son, and the Tzedoki was too stupid to pick up on that. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "You show to what you are. You don't even know pshat in the pasuk, but I'll show you that your whole kal v'chomer is completely wrong." Beautiful. Now we're going to start a new Gemara. Yerushas Halta Levinyamin V'Loyimacha Shevet Misrael. Let's read the pasuk inside. What happened was, Rahman al-Islam, there was a horrible story about Pilegesh Begiva, and Klal Yisrael ganged up on Binyamin and killed every member of Shevet Binyamin except for 600 men. Every single woman from Shevet Binyamin was wiped out, and every single man besides 600 that were allowed to remain alive. V'yomer, now they have a little bit of a problem because these men needed to find women. They definitely couldn't marry women from Shevet Binyamin because there were none. So they ended up finding women from different places. And now our concern is, what if someone would only have daughters? Now his Yerusha would go out of Shevet Binyamin. Now, we were only makbid on that first generation in the Midbar. This is much later. Why were we concerned? The teretz is, we said a svara then. Why is it that we were only makbid on the first generation not to be Mesav Nachla, and not later on? And the answer was, the first generation, everyone had a massive piece. If that moved to a different Shevet, it would really deplete one Shevet. But once you're talking about later generations, anyway, each piece got smaller and smaller because it was diluted amongst the Einliklich and the Einliklich. So therefore, it wasn't such a big deal. But Binyamin was starting all over again with 600 people. If one of the 600 men would lose the Yerusha to a different Shevet, that would have a huge impact. 1/600 is a big impact. So they needed to reinstate the ban of girls marrying out of their Shevet. The Yarmi Yerusha's played to Binyamin, v'lo yimacha Shevet mi Yisrael. We don't want them to get messed up. So because of that, they made a temporary injunction that girls, these girls could only marry people from Shevet Binyamin. So Zogt Gemara, Amr Rabbi Yitzchak devei Rab Ami Melamed shehisnu al Shevet Binyamin shloi tirish basa ben ma'ach. Now, what would happen? What would happen if a man from Binyamin had 5 children? He had 4 boys and he had 1 girl. And what happened was, I'm sorry, he had 4 boys. Some of them had 4 boys, and one of his 4 boys died, and the man that died had no sons, only daughters. So now the Yerusha is supposed to be split up into 4 parts. Each of his 4 sons gets one. The deceased son is not there, so his chelik would go to his daughter, which is what we said, right? That Bas haben Yarshins amongst the brothers. But they suspended that. You know why? Because if this granddaughter would end up marrying out of the Shevet, that chelik and nachla would be lost to Shevet Biyama forever. So they temporarily suspended the halacha that Abbas haben Yarshins. They had to do that with Hefker Bez Nefker, because Midaraisa, it belongs to the granddaughter. But through Hefker Bez Nefker, they said, no, we're not going to let this granddaughter Yarsh. Someone who doesn't leave over a son to Yarshin him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Molei Olav Evra. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is angry at him. Right? We said if there's no son, you will be ma'avir the nachla. And the word avara could also mean the day of punishment. So you see, there's punishment. There's punishment for someone who doesn't have sons. Asher ein chalifa islamai, because there is no one to rejuvenate, to pass on to him this Yerusha. And they're not Yerei Elokim. Now, this is a massive statement. How could someone be responsible if he didn't have sons? He's an oinus. So there's a lot of different shatim in the Achrayim and the Rishonim shot in this Gemara. So I saw in the Marsha, one shot is, we're talking about somebody who didn't try to be Isaac in Peri V'Revia. He didn't want to get married. So it's his fault that he didn't have children. That's one shot. Another shot that I saw is, we're talking about someone who had children and they died because he had a virus. Or it could be, it's speaking about someone who had children, and although they are alive, but they're not Yorish, meaning he didn't train them in the way of the Rebbeinu Shalom. He didn't train them with Yiddishkeit. So Vibati didn't raise them as proper Erlich Eden. They're not like, it's like he doesn't have sons. That's what it could mean. An interesting thing that the Mashal speaks out is, La'achar Me'ah Ve'eshim, they're going to ask us 3 questions. They're going to ask us, V'nesata B'amuna, were you honest in business? Then they're going to ask him, Kavati idam l'toyer, and then they're going to ask him, Osakta b'peri of. And it's very interesting to note, it's an interesting way of expressing it. What do you mean, Osakta b'peri of? Did you have children? So there are those who learn, and that's how the Mashal is learning over here. Osakta b'peri means, did you try to get married? If you tried to get married, then you did your job. It's not your fault if you couldn't find a wife, if you couldn't have children. But you were Isaac, you tried, and it's only considered Evra, and Hashem's upset with you, if and only if you didn't try. But there are those who learn that Osakta b'peri v'revia means Isaac in making shidduchim. I believe I think it could be the some Rebbe said it. I heard it from one of the Rebbes that Osakta b'peri v'revia means if you are Isaac in shidduchim, that's called being Isaac in peri v'revia, and you're mekayim that. There was another pshat that was said that if someone doesn't have children, it's not pshat because he doesn't have children, Hashem's angry at him. Because Hashem's angry at him, that's why he doesn't have children. He won't have someone to say Kaddish for him. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, there was a machlokes how to decipher this. Chad omer kol she'ein noimeniach ben. The ever is someone who doesn't leave over a child. Chad omer kol she'ein noimeniach talmud. Someone who doesn't have any talmidim. Tis time, let's bring a raya that it's the Rabbi Yochanan and the Omer Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan said the ever is if you don't have a Talmud, but if you don't have a son, that's not a problem with that. How do I know this? Rabbi Yochanan Dain Grama Dasira Abir. He used to walk around to try to comfort people who lost children and said, don't feel so bad. This is the tooth of the 10th son of mine that died. In other words, I lost 10 sons and I have no children left. So if Rabbi Yochanan was going to comfort people that way, it doesn't make sense that he would publicize and advertise about himself that Hashem's angry at him. Keilu did Avera. She's like publicizing, I'm a Bal Avera. It doesn't make sense he would do that. So Al Karchach, he must hold that if you don't have Talmidim, there's Evra. But if you don't have children, there's no Evra at all. That's one pshat. There was another pshat brought down in the Rishonim, is if you're telling me that if you don't have children, Hashem's angry at you, exactly how is that comforting somebody? They ain't grumbled to Sarah Beer, Hashem's angry at me because I have no children, and therefore he's angry at you too. Hardly a good comfort. So must be that Rebbe Chanel, there's nothing wrong with losing your children. It doesn't show anything bad against you. Not having Talmidim shows something bad against you. So Zok at this time, Rabbi Yochanan Damar Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan must hold that not having Talmidim, that's Evra. Umid Rabbi Yochanan Amar Talmud, by process of elimination, Rabbi Shua ben Levi Amar Ben. Rabbi Shua ben Levi holds that someone who doesn't leave over a son to Yarshanim, that's someone who's Hashem's angry at. Rabbi Shua ben Levi also levei Tamyu. Rabbi Shua ben Levi never went to a base ovel. Ella levei man d'shachiv b'leiban. He only was menachem ovel, somebody who died without children. If he held those were Bal Aveir, why would he be menachem ovel then? So it must be that he holds dying without children is not a bad thing. Dichsiv, why didn't he go? Why did he go b'davka? Because it says bachai lahaylech, and we dash in the pasuk from Rabbi Yehuda Amarav lahaylech v'loy ben zachar. Cry for somebody who dies without a ben zachar. So clearly that's someone you're supposed to cry for. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that. So it must be fakert. Rabbi Shua ben Levi who do Amar Talmud. Shua ben Levi must have said that it's ever if you don't have a Talmud, but if you don't have a son, it's not a problem. Umid Rabbi Shua ben Levi who do Amar Talmud. If Rabbi Shua ben Levi is a Talmud, it must be that Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ben. If he held that it's a bad thing if someone doesn't have a son, how did he walk around saying Dain Grama de Asirab here? That's more like Asha. How did they have the rabbi? Rabbi Yochanan himself held that it's only ever if you don't have a Talmud. But if you don't have a son, there's nothing wrong. But his Rebbe, remember, Rabbi Yochanan said it over in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Shimon Yochai held that not having a son is ever. But Rabbi Yochanan didn't hold it. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Simin Hadod Oni v'chach. Dorsh Rav Pinchas ben Chama. Ma'idich said it says in the pasuk. The Hadod, who was a fellow from Edom, he was a king from Edom, and he was locked up in Mitzrayim. Shama ben Mitzrayim, in Mitzrayim he heard Ki shachav David, that David was nifter, ima v'isov, v'chimeis Yoav sar hatzava, and also that Yoav, the general, died. Now, isn't it interesting how when it describes the death of David, it says shachav, and when it describes the death of Yoav, it says meis. Frek the Gemara, mipnei ma b'David nemer by shchiva, v'Yoav nemer by misa. So the answer is David sheniach ben David that left over a son, Nemer by Shechiva. But Yoav Shalaniach Ben, he didn't leave over a son, Nemer by Misa. Frank Gemara, Yoav in fact did have a son. The Yoav Lo Yaniach Ben, he did leave over a son. Yoav, the Einiklach of Yoav, one of them was Ovadia ben Yechiel. So you see, Yoav left over progeny. Ella, David Sheniach ben Kemoisai, David who left over a son like Shlomo Melech, who was holy, like David was. Nemer by Shchiva. Right? Because the bras carried Arvua. The Shlomo was Mezaka David as if David was just resting. But Yoav Shalaniach ben Kemoisai, he didn't leave over a son who was on the Madrega that he was. Number by Misa. Darsha Pinchas ben Chama. Kasha Aniyas Pesach Beisa Shal Adam. Poverty in a home is worse. Yosy Mechamisha Makis, worse than 50 Makis. Shenemar, Eob said to his friends, Chanuni, Chanuni, Atem Rayai, have Rachmanis me, help me, my dear friends. Yad Eloika Nogabi, the hand of Hashem hit me. Now, Eob was suffering terrible pain. He was living in terrible pain. And he referred to that as Yad Eloika. Now we know in the Haggadah we say, how do you know that in Mitzrayim they suffered 10 Makos and Alayam Chamisha Makos? Because by the Mitzrayim it says Etzber Lekimhi, and by the Krishamet it says Vayari shows Hayot Hagdoy Lashas Hashem b'Mitzrayim. So when Eob used the word Yad, he was referring to those 50 Makos. I'm suffering 50 Makos. And what did his friend respond? The Karmi Lay, his friend responded, Kishamar al Teifen Alavan, don't complain. Even though you're suffering such horrible pain, it's still better than suffering from poverty. Anybody who has a sick person in his house, he should go to a chacham, and he should ask the chacham to daven for him. And Hashem's upset at the Malach HaNova, so he sends your way. The Ish Chacham Yichaprena, but an Ish Chacham could wipe away the Averis and get a kapara so that the person should be healed. There's a famous story with a man who came to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach crying, my wife is very sick, please daven for her. And Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach vinched him nicely, and as soon as the gentleman left, he took out his tehillim and he was davening, and sure enough, the next day, the Yid comes back to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and says, the Rebbe is a Baal Moifis. He poiled us that my wife should feel better. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told him over from somebody, I don't remember from who, he asked him, why does it say, if you have a chaylo, you should be yelech etzel chacham, v'yavakash olav rachim. Maybe you should go to a tzaddik, maybe you should go to a rebbe. What's that as chacham? So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, you know why? Because a rebbe or a tzaddik might be foolish enough to think that he poiled us a moifis. Go to a chacham who will know it's the tefillas to the Rebbeinu Shloim and the tehillim that poiled us, not because you're anything special. Zok the heilige Gemara weiter. Zaklal, this is the rule. Anybody who is in the first place for nachla, like a son over a daughter, all of the children of this son will be before the daughter. But a father always comes before his children, like we illustrated earlier, that before it goes to the siblings of the nifter, it goes to the father of the nifter. Boy, Rami Bar Chama had a following shayla. Avia Av. What if it was the father was no longer alive, but the grandfather was alive, and Va'achaya Av, and the uncles were alive? Kigoyin Avram v'Yishmael b'nichsa Esav. Esav died, and his father was Yitzchak. Yitzchak wasn't alive, but Avram was alive, and not only was Avram alive, Yitzchak's brother Yishmael was alive. So the question is, who would it go to first? Would it go to Avram, which is the grandfather, or would it go to Yishmael, who's the sibling? Or Yishmael, who's the uncle, the sibling of the father? Zog to Gemara, Ezem and Kodim, who goes first? That's what Rabbi Bar Chama wanted to know. Omar Rava, Zog Rava, it's Pasha, Tashma, Ha'av Kodim, L'chol Yoytze Yerechai. The father is before any Yoytze Yerechai. So, Avada, who would come first? Avada Avram would be before Yishmael, because before it goes to the siblings, so before it would go, who was Esau's father? Yaakov's father was Yitzchak. Before we would go to Yitzchak's siblings, meaning Yishmael, it would Avada go to Avram. because the father comes before his children. So, what kind of shaila did Rabbi Bachama declare to Pashat Halacha? Rabbi Bachama, Agav Churfe, since he was so sharp, he overlooked something that was so obvious. Why? Because his attention was focused on another shaila that was quite involved that we're going to discuss right now. Agav Churfe loy ayin. What was he busy with that diverted his focus from the first shaila that was Pashat? Boy Rabbi Bachama. What about Avia Av ve'Achiv? Kagoin Avram v'Yaakov b'nichsei Esav. Esav died. Okay, Esav died, and Yitzchak, his father, was not alive anymore. But Yitzchak's father Avram was alive. So the question is, should it go to Avram, who was Yitzchak's father, because Yitzchak wasn't alive, or should it rather go to Esav's sibling Yaakov? Esav ben Koid. Omar Rava, Zok Rava, we have a Meforshah Mishnah. Tashma ha'av koidim l'chol yotzei yerechai. The father is before any of his enikla. So Avram Avinu is before Yaakov, because Yaakov is a yotzei yerech of Avram. He might not be directly Avram's child, but he's Yitzchak's child. That's an enikla of Avram Avinu, so Avram would come first. Rabbi Bar Chama, he argued on Rava, like we learned Pashtus as well, not like what Rava said. He learns Yosy Yerechei Shaloi, below Yosy Yerechei Shal Benoi. That the Mishnah says a father comes before his children, that means his direct children, not his grandchildren. So therefore, Avram would not come before Yaakov. Yitzchak would come before Yaakov, because Yaakov is a Yosy Yerech of Yitzchak directly. But Avram is not the father of Yaakov, he's the grandfather of Yaakov, and he will not come before Yaakov. It's mistaver to say that Rami Bar Chama's understanding is correct. The Katani we learned in our Mishnah, Zaklal, this is the rule. If you are in the first position to get Yerusha, all of his offspring will also be in his place. So let's think about it. Yitzchak is not alive now, but how is it that Yaakov yarshins from Esav? He yarshins it through his father Yitzchak, because it goes first to Yitzchak, and if Yitzchak's not alive, only then would it go to Yaakov. So if Yitzchak was alive, Vilu Isla Yitzchak, clearly Yitzchak Kaidim. Yitzchak would be first. So Yitzchak would get it before Avram. Wouldn't go up to the grandfather of Avram. It would go to Yitzchak. So Esav's Yerusha would go to Yitzchak. So the Bava goes to Yitzchak. We know Kol Yotzei Yerech Yitzchak come before anybody else. So they were Hash to Nami the lesser Yitzchak. Even though Yitzchak's not alive anymore, it won't go up to Avram because the Yotzei Yerech of Yitzchak come first, which is Yaakov. So therefore Yaakov is Kaidim. Yaakov would come before Avram. Shemami no, that's a Kloraya, which is exactly how we learned from the Mishnah all along, which was how we learned the Seder HaNachla. In fact, that it goes first to a son and any of his progeny. If there's no son and any progeny, it goes to a daughter and any of her progeny. If there's no son or daughter or any progeny, then it goes to the father. If the father's not alive, then it would go to the brothers of the nifter and any of their progeny. If there is no brothers or any of their progeny, then it would go to the sister of the nifter and any of their progeny. And if none of them exist, then you can't go up to the father because the father's not alive, but then you would go to the father's siblings. So first you would go to the father's brothers. I'm sorry, before you go to the father's brothers, remember the father comes first. It will go to the father's father. If the father's father is not alive, then it will go to the father's brothers and their progeny. And if there's no brothers, it would go to the father's sisters and their progeny. And if there was none left, then it would go again another generation up. And it would keep on going up and up until it got to the Shevet. Beautiful. Now we'll start a new mission. The Benois Tzalofchad, they really had a massive payout because they actually got 3 chalokim of Yerusha. And this is how it worked. We know that when Yeshua came to Eretz Yisrael, he split up the land. Now, what he did was, he didn't say, okay, let's make a count of all the people that entered Eretz Yisrael, and we'll give them each a chelik. That's not how it worked. because the land of Eretz Yisrael was not granted to the Ba'i Eretz Yisrael. Rather, the land of Eretz Yisrael was already given to the Yosy Mitzrayim. So what happened is all of the Yidden who were alive, who were already born at Yetzias Mitzrayim, they got a part of Eretz Yisrael. Even though they might never have made it to Eretz Yisrael, whatever part they got would have been split equally amongst their children. So let's look, for example, at Reuben and Shimon. Let's say Reuben and Shimon were both Yosy Mitzrayim, so they each will get an equal part of Eretz Yisrael. What happened when Reuben's children and Shimon's children make it to Eretz Yisrael? So Reuben's children are going to get Reuben's piece, and Shimon's children are going to get Shimon's piece. Well, what if Reuben only had one child, and Shimon had 10 children? So what's going to happen is Reuben's one child is going to get Reuben's whole chelik, and Shimon's 10 children are going to have to split Shimon's chelik into 10 parts. But that's how it worked. So Rashbam tells us that Tzlofchad was the child of Chefer. Tzlofchad had brothers, but Tzlofchad was the Bechar. So Tzlofchad was the oldest son to his father Chefer, and Tzlofchad was already born when they left Mitzrayim. He had to be an adult, he had to be 20. So he was 20 when they left Mitzrayim, meaning that whatever chelik Chefer got in Eretz Yisrael, Tzlofchad got an equal chelik, because Tzlofchad, independent of Chefer, was allotted his own chelik of Eretz Yisrael because he was a Yosy Mitzrayim. So right off the bat, the Bnei Tzlofchad got that chelik. So Bnei Tzlofchad Nachla Gimel Chalokim, first of all, Benachla, in the Nachla, one was chelik Avian, Shayim Yosy Mitzrayim. Right off the bat, they got the big chelik that Chefer got, that Tzlofchad got directly from Yeshua, equal to what his father got, because he got just like his father did. Now, from his father's chelik, they had to split it up. Let's say Chefer had 3 brothers, for instance. So they would split it up into, let's say Chefer had 4 sons, and Tzlofchad had 3 brothers. So they would split Chefer's chelik into 4 for each of the 4 sons. But there's a Bechar, so they would really split up Chefer's chelik into 5 chalakim. And out of those 5 chalakim, Tzlofchad would have gotten 2, his regular share and his chelik HaBechayra. And then the other 3 parts would go to the other 3 brothers. So Kum Techais, the Bnei Tzlofchad, who Yashin, their father, got 2 chalakim out of Chefer's Yerusha, because their father was a Bechar, plus they got the whole chelik that their father got directly from Yeshua. So therefore they got 3 chalakim. They got chelik Avim Shayim Yosy Mitzrayim. They got Chelkayim Achiv B'nechsei Chefer. They got Tzlofchad's fair share of the nechasim of his father. V'shahaya Bechar, Tzlofchad was also a Bechar, so therefore Noitel Shnei Chalakim. So you can imagine they got way more than their uncles. I'm sure their uncles weren't so happy, but that is the halacha. They got all those 3 chalakim. Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish Shabbos is blood, which is Kuf Tasayin, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow we will learn Taf Kuf Yud Zayin. Everyone should have a good tavach, a gebench tavach.